Thaddeus Morgan married the town's old maid with rage burning in his chest, a desperate last resort to save his failing ranch from the banker's grasp. He never imagined this unwanted wife would be the one to heal the jagged wounds left by his dead family and teach his frozen heart to beat again. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Under the punishing sun of Redemption Creek, Thaddeus Morgan rode with grim determination, his weathered face set like stone beneath the brim of his Stetson. The drought had lasted 3 months now, and his cattle were dying. The creek that gave the town its name had shriveled to a trickle, more mud than water. His boots were caked with dust that never seemed to wash away, no matter how hard he scrubbed. It was as if the earth itself was turning against him, just like everything else in his godforsaken life. He guided his horse past the broken fence line he'd been meaning to fix for weeks. Everything on the ranch was falling apart, and he hadn't the will nor the means to stop it. Not since Sarah and the boy had died. 3 years had passed, but some wounds never healed, just scabbed over enough to keep a man breathing. The pain remained, a constant companion he'd grown accustomed to carrying. The town appeared on the horizon, a scatter of wooden buildings that seemed to cower beneath the vast, cloudless sky. Thaddeus rarely ventured there anymore. The pitying glances and hushed conversations that stopped when he entered a room were more than he could stomach, but today he had no choice. Judge Wilson had summoned him, and even a broken man knew better than to ignore the most powerful figure in the county. Dust swirled around him as he hitched his horse outside the courthouse, a building that stood taller than the rest, its white paint peeling like dead skin in the relentless heat. Inside, the air was stale but cooler. His boots echoed on the wooden floor as he made his way to the judge's chambers, hat clutched in hands that were calloused from work but had forgotten how to pray. "Sit down, Thaddeus," Judge Wilson said without looking up from the papers on his desk. He was a large man with small eyes that missed nothing. "You're looking rough." "Didn't come for compliments," Thaddeus replied, remaining standing. "What's this about, Judge?" "I've got cattle dying." The judge finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "Your cattle aren't the only thing dying, son. That ranch of yours is on its last legs. You owe the bank more money than you're likely to see in a decade." Thaddeus's jaw tightened. "I'll pay what I owe." "With what?" The judge leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Your land's dried up, your herd's half dead, and frankly, you look like you're not far behind them. You summoned me to insult me?" Thaddeus took a step forward, anger flaring in his chest like a struck match. "I summoned you to save you from yourself." The judge's voice softened just slightly. "I made a promise to your father before he passed. Said I'd look after you. Haven't done a good job of it, but I aim to fix that now." Thaddeus snorted. "Don't need looking after. Evidence suggests otherwise." The judge stood up, walking to a cabinet where he poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He offered one to Thaddeus, who took it reluctantly. "I'm proposing a solution to your problems, one that will clear your debts and give you a fresh start." Thaddeus took a long swallow, the whiskey burning a path down his throat. "What's the catch?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them, absurd and impossible. Thaddeus barked out a laugh that held no humor. "You've gone soft in the head, Judge. Who in their right mind would marry the likes of me, Eleanor Abernathy?" Thaddeus's glass froze halfway to his lips. "The school teacher?" "The same. She must be pushing 30, Thaddeus said, as if this explained everything. 32, the judge corrected, "and she's got a substantial inheritance from her late uncle, enough to pay off your debts and then some. Plus she's educated. Could help with the books, make that ranch profitable again." "And what does Miss Abernathy get from this arrangement?" "Respectability. A home of her own, perhaps children, if you're both willing." Thaddeus slammed his glass down, whiskey sloshing over the rim. "This is madness. I'm not marrying some," he searched for the word. "Spinster for her money? Old maid is the term folks around here use," the judge said mildly. "And it's not just for her money, though. Lord knows you need it. It's for your survival. Hers too, in a way." "She agrees to this?" Thaddeus couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "She does. Her situation in town isn't as comfortable as it appears. The school board's been making noises about replacing her with a younger woman, one who might draw a husband from among the eligible minors coming through. Times are changing, Thaddeus. A woman alone has few options, especially one her age." Thaddeus paced the small office, feeling trapped. "I don't need a wife. I had one. She's gone. Sarah's been dead 3 years," the judge said, his voice gentle but firm. "The living have to go on living, son." Thaddeus turned away, staring out the window at the dusty street below. A woman in a simple blue dress was crossing it, her back straight, a book clutched to her chest. Eleanor Abernathy. He'd seen her before, of course. Redemption Creek wasn't large enough to avoid anyone entirely. She had always struck him as severe, with her hair pulled back tight and those wire-rimmed spectacles perched on her nose. Not unattractive, but there was something intimidating about a woman who knew more words than most men in these parts. "I won't force you," the judge said behind, "but the bank will take your land next month if something doesn't change. And I'd hate to see John Morgan's son lose everything his family built." Thaddeus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his father's legacy pressing down on him. The ranch had been in the Morgan family for 3 generations. His grandfather had claimed it with blood and sweat. His father had expanded it through sheer determination, and he, Thaddeus, was watching it crumble through his fingers like the dry earth outside. "I'll think on it," he finally said. "Don't think too long. Eleanor has other options. Thaddeus raised an eyebrow at that. Thought you said she was desperate. I said her options were limited, not non-existent. There's a widower in Copper Ridge who's expressed interest. Has 5 young children in need of a mother. 5? Despite everything, Thaddeus almost smiled. Poor woman, indeed. So you'll consider my proposal? It's not your proposal, is it? Thaddeus jammed his hat back on his head. I'll speak to Miss Abernathy myself. If we're to be yoked together like oxen, might as well look her in the eye first. The judge nodded, satisfied. She takes her lunch at the cafe most days. Alone. Thaddeus left without another word, the burden of his decision heavy on his shoulders. Outside, the heat hit him like a physical blow. He stood for a moment, squinting in the bright sunlight, trying to adjust to a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. The cafe was a modest establishment with checkered curtains in the windows and the smell of fresh bread wafting from within. Thaddeus hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware of his dust-covered clothes and the stubble on his jaw. He hadn't prepared for this, hadn't prepared for anything since the day he'd buried his wife and son. Eleanor Abernathy sat alone by the window, a book open beside her plate. She looked up as the bell above the door announced his arrival, and their eyes met across the room. Hers were a clear, intelligent blue that seemed to cut through his defenses. Without conscious decision, Thaddeus found himself walking toward her table. Miss Abernathy, he said, removing his hat. Might I have a word? She regarded him steadily, showing neither surprise nor discomfort at his sudden appearance. Morgan, she replied, her voice low and measured. I've been expecting you. Judge Wilson, Thaddeus explained, feeling foolish. Yes. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. Please sit. Would you like some coffee? He sat, placing his hat on his knee. No. Thank you. I won't take much of your time. Time is one commodity I have in abundance, Mr. Morgan. There was something in her tone, not bitterness exactly, but a clear-eyed acknowledgement of her situation that caught him off guard. They sat in silence for a moment, the bustle of the cafe continuing around them. Thaddeus found himself studying her face. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, not like Sarah had been with her golden curls and dimpled smile. Eleanor Abernathy's beauty was subtler, high cheekbone, a straight nose, lips that seemed perpetually on the verge of a smile they rarely completed. Her brown hair was streaked with threads of copper where the sunlight touched it. The judge says you're agreeable to this ... arrangement, Thaddeus finally said, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. I am. She closed her book, marking her place with a ribbon. Though I think we should be clear about what this arrangement entails before proceeding further. Marriage, Thaddeus said bluntly. Yes, marriage. But what kind? Will it be a partnership in name only, or do you expect ... single quotes? She hesitated, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. True marriage in all respect. Thaddeus felt his own face grow warm. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Perhaps you should, she replied. If we are to enter into this contract, we should both understand its terms. Contract, Pete. Is that how you see marriage, Miss Abernathy? As a business arrangement? In our case, yes. She met his gaze directly. You need my inheritance to save your ranch. I need the security of a husband and home to maintain my position in this community. It seems a fair exchange. And what of love? The question surprised even him. A sad smile touched her lips. Love is a luxury neither of us can afford, Mr. Morgan. I've had yours. I've resigned myself to living without it. Her frankness struck him like a physical blow. There was no self-pity in her voice, just a matter-of-fact acceptance that made him suddenly ashamed of his own wallowing these past 3 years. I can offer you respect, he found himself saying, and fidelity. I won't dishonor you. Then we understand each other. She extended her hand across the table as if they were concluding a business deal. I accept your proposal, Mr. Morgan. He took her hand, noting its unexpected strength and warmth. I didn't exactly propose. Semantics. There was that almost smile again. Shall we say Sunday? Judge Wilson can perform the ceremony after services. Thaddeus nodded, feeling as if he were watching himself from a distance, a spectator to his own life. Sunday it is. Word spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. By sundown, everyone knew that Thaddeus Morgan was to marry Eleanor Abernathy on Sunday. The saloon buzzed with speculation, the general store hummed with whispered theories, and the ladies' sewing circle nearly pricked their fingers raw discussing the unlikely match. Poor Eleanor, Mrs. Peterson said, expertly threading her needle, to settle for a man broken beyond repair. Poor Thaddeus, more like Mrs. Holloway countered, getting himself hitched to that bookish spinster with her fancy Eastern ideas. It's the money, mister, Davis declared at the barbershop. Morgan's desperate, and she's his last hope. It's loneliness, the barber replied sagely. Eats at a person worse than hunger. Eleanor heard none of this directly. No one dared speak such thoughts to her face, but she felt the weight of their stares as she walked from the schoolhouse to her small rented room above the milliner's shop. She held her head high as she always had. Let them talk. She'd endured worse. That evening she sat at her small desk penning a letter to her cousin in Boston. By the time you receive this, I will be Merce. Thaddeus Morgan, she wrote, the words looking strange on paper. It is not the marriage I once dreamed of, but dreams are for the young, and I have not been young for some time. Mr. Morgan needs a wife to save his ranch. I need a husband to secure my position. We are both practical people entering into a practical arrangement. She paused, pen hovering over the paper. Was that all there was to it? She recalled the intensity in Thaddeus Morgan's dark eyes when he'd asked about love, as if he'd momentarily forgotten his own determination to keep the world at arm's length. There had been something compelling about his raw honesty, his lack of pretense. He didn't smile falsely or speak empty platitudes like so many men did when addressing a woman they considered plain and past her prime. He's a man of few words, she kept writing, but those he speaks seem to carry the weight of genuine thought behind. I believe we will deal fairly with each other, which is perhaps more than many can say of their marriages. Across town, Thaddeus sat on his porch, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a blaze of orange and purple. The ranch house was silent behind him, too large for one man, its rooms filled with echoes and memories. He tried to imagine Eleanor here, her books lining the shelves, her voice filling the empty spaces. It seemed impossible, like trying to picture a deer in a wolf's den. "What am I doing, Sarah?" he whispered to the gathering darkness. There was no answer, of course. There never was. Sunday dawned clear and hot, the sky a merciless blue. Thaddeus bathed in the creek, shaved carefully, and donned the suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, the only decent clothes he still owned. It hung looser on him now, a testament to the weight he'd lost during these lean years. He rode into town early, nodding stiffly to those he passed on the street. Everyone knew where he was headed. Everyone would be watching. The thought made his collar feel tight around his neck. The church was small but well maintained, its white clapboard exterior gleaming in the sunlight. Inside it was cool and dim, smelling of beeswax candles and old hymnals. Judge Wilson was already there, speaking quietly with the pastor. "Thaddeus," the judge greeted him. "You came." "Said I would," Thaddeus replied shortly, though in truth he'd spent half the night fighting the urge to ride in the opposite direction, to leave everything behind and start fresh somewhere no one knew his name or his sorrows. "Eleanor's in the side room," the judge informed him. "Pastor Williams has agreed to let me perform the ceremony, but he'll be witnessing, legal and proper, as I promised." Thaddeus nodded, his throat suddenly dry. He hadn't expected many guests, he had no family left, and his friends had drifted away during his years of self-imposed isolation, but he was surprised to see the pews slowly filling as townspeople trickled in. Mrs. Peterson and her sewing circle, Mayor Davis from the barber shop, the sheriff and his wife. Even the banker who held his overdue mortgage looked on with undisguised curiosity. "Quite a turnout for a business arrangement," Thaddeus muttered. The judge chuckled. "First wedding in Redemption Creek in over a year. People are starved for entertainment." Before Thaddeus could reply, the side door opened, and Eleanor Abernathy stepped out. She wore a simple gray dress with a high collar, not white. They both knew this was no traditional marriage, but there was a small spray of wildflowers pinned to her bodice. Her hair was arranged more softly than usual, with a few tendrils framing her face. Without her spectacles, her blue eyes seemed larger, more vulnerable. Thaddeus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight band that had constricted his heart for so long. Eleanor walked toward him steadily, her back straight, her gaze direct. When she reached his side, she gave him a small nod, as if confirming their agreement one final time. He returned it, finding himself strangely glad that she hadn't attempted a false smile or a show of affection for the audience. They stood before Judge Wilson, side by side but not touching, as he began the ceremony. The words washed over Thaddeus like water over stone, familiar phrases about honor and cherish, sickness and health until death do us part. He had spoken these vows once before, had meant them with every fiber of his being. Now they felt like lines in a play, necessary but hollow. When it came time for the rings, there was an awkward pause. Thaddeus had not thought to provide one, and Eleanor had expected none. "I have something that might serve," the judge said quietly, reaching into his pocket. He produced a simple gold band. It was my mother's. She'd want it used for a good purpose. Thaddeus accepted it with a nod of thanks, then turned to Eleanor. Her hand was steady as she extended it to him. He slipped the ring onto her finger, surprised to find it a near-perfect fit. Their eyes met, and for a moment the crowded church, the judge, the vows, everything faded away. There was only this woman with her clear gaze and straight spine, joining her life to his for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Judge Wilson declared. "You may kiss the bride." Thaddeus hesitated. They hadn't discussed this part. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but she tilted her face up to his, her expression resolute. He leaned down and pressed his lips briefly to hers, a chaste, formal gesture that nonetheless sent an unexpected jolt through his body. Her lips were soft and warm, and she smelled faintly of lavender. It was over in an instant. They turned to face the congregation as one, not holding hands, but standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The townspeople applauded politely, their expressions ranging from approval to skepticism to outright disbelief. "Mrs. Morgan," Thaddeus said quietly as they walked down the aisle together. The name felt strange on his tongue. "Mr. Morgan," she replied, equally formal. Outside, the sun was blinding after the church's dim interior. A few people approached with congratulations, which they accepted with awkward thanks. Eleanor's students had formed a line, each presenting her with a wildflower or a small handmade token. She accepted each one graciously, knowing the children well enough to call them by name and thank them for their specific gift. Watching her, Thaddeus realized how deeply rooted she was in this community. Despite her status as an outsider, she had built connections, earned respect. It occurred to him that he was gaining more than just her inheritance in this bargain. "Your wagon's ready," the judge announced, gesturing to where Thaddeus's buckboard waited, his horse already hitched. Someone, probably the judge, had tied a small bunch of tin cans to the back, a traditional gesture for newlywed. Eleanor said her goodbyes, embracing a few of the women, shaking hands with the men. When she reached Judge Wilson, she stood on tiptoe to kiss his weathered cheek. "Thank you," she said softly. "Be happy," he replied, his eyes suspiciously bright. Thaddeus helped her onto the wagon seat, acutely aware of the eyes watching their every move. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, and with a flick of his wrist, set the horse in motion. The cans rattled behind them, an incongruously festive sound. They rode in silence until the town disappeared behind them. The vast landscape stretched before them, the ranch still a distant smudge on the horizon. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the steady clop of hooves, and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. "Will you tell me about the ranch?" Eleanor finally asked, her voice carrying easily in the quiet. Thaddeus glanced at her, surprised. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," she said simply. "If it's to be my home, I should understand it." Home. The word hung between them, laden with meaning. Thaddeus hadn't thought of the ranch as a home since he'd lost his family. It had become merely a place where he existed, each day bleeding into the next without purpose or joy. "It's not much to look at these days," he admitted. "Droughts hit us hard, cattle are thin, fences need mending. House needs work too, but it has good bones," she suggested. "A strong foundation." He considered this. "Yes. My grandfather chose the land well. There's a spring that hasn't failed yet, even in the worst dry spells. And the soil's rich in the north section when there's rain enough to work it. Then we have something to build on," Eleanor said, her tone matter of fact. "I don't expect paradise, Mr. Morgan. I just need to know what we're facing together." Together. Another word that struck him like a physical blow. He hadn't done anything together with anyone for 3 long years. "Call me Thaddeus," he said abruptly. "If we're to be husband and wife, even in name only, Mr. Morgan seems overly formal." She nodded. "And I'm Eleanor." The wagon hit a rut, jostling them closer together momentarily. He could feel the warmth of her body through the layers of clothing that separated them, a reminder that this arrangement, practical as it might be, involved 2 living, breathing people with needs and desires they had both long suppressed. "Eleanor," he said, testing the name, finding he liked the way it felt in his mouth. "Welcome to your new home." The Morgan Ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, shimmering in the late afternoon heat. As they drew closer, Eleanor could make out the weathered 2-story house, a large barn with a sagging roof and various outbuildings scattered across the property. A windmill creaked slowly in the distance, its metal vanes catching the sunlight. "It's larger than I expected," she remarked, breaking the long silence. Thaddeus nodded. "My father added the 2nd story when he married my mother. Said a proper family needed a proper home." His voice carried no emotion, just stating facts. "There's 4 bedrooms upstairs, mine's at the end of the hall. You can take your pick of the others." Eleanor glanced at him, noting his rigid profile, so they would not be sharing a room. She had expected as much, had even hoped for it, yet the confirmation left her feeling strangely hollow. "Thank you," she said simply. As they pulled up to the house, Eleanor noticed the peeling paint, the missing shutter on one upstairs window, the porch step that had rotted through. Signs of neglect were everywhere, telling the story of a man who had stopped caring about appearances, perhaps about everything, years ago. Thaddeus helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and calloused around her waist. It was the first time he had touched her since their brief kiss in the church, and she was acutely aware of his proximity, the scent of leather and sun-warm skin that clung. "I'll get your trunk," he said, releasing her quickly. Eleanor climbed the porch steps carefully, avoiding the broken one, and pushed open the front door. The interior was cool and dim after the brightness outside. She stood in the entryway, allowing her eyes to adjust, taking in her new home. The parlor to her right was sparsely furnished, a worn sofa, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace with a mantel that needed dusting. A hunting rifle hung above it, along with a pair of antlers. To her left was a dining room with a large oak table and 6 chairs, one at the head showing more wear than the other. Straight ahead, a hallway led presumably to the kitchen and back of the house. It was a man's home, lacking any feminine touches. No curtains softened the windows, no rugs warmed the wooden floors, no pictures or mementos personalized the walls. Yet Eleanor could see what it had once been, and what it could be again with care and attention. Thaddeus entered behind her, carrying her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Where would you like this?" "I should see the bedrooms first," she replied, moving toward the staircase. He followed her up, the stairs creaking beneath their weight. The upper hallway was narrow, with 4 doors leading off it. Thaddeus pointed to each in turn. "Mine," he said, indicating the last door on the right. "That one was my parents'," he continued, nodding to the room across from his. "Those 2 were." He stopped abruptly, and Eleanor knew without being told that one had belonged to his son. "I'll take this one," she said quickly, opening the door to what had been his parents' room. It was spacious, with a large bed that had been stripped to the mattress, a dresser, and a washstand. Dust motes danced in the sunbeam that streamed through the window. Thaddeus set her trunk down at the foot of the bed. "There's clean linens in the closet," he said. I'll bring up water for washing. Thank you, Eleanor said again, wondering if these formal exchanges would characterize their entire marriage. Perhaps after I've settled you could show me the kitchen? I should prepare something for supper. A shadow crossed his face. Been a while since I had a proper meal. Usually just heat up beans or whatever's at hand. Don't expect much. I don't require fancy foods, Thaddeus. But we both need to eat well if we're to work this ranch back to prosperity. He gave her a long look as if seeing her anew. You really intend to help with the ranch? Of course. It's my home now too. She spoke with more confidence than she felt, but Eleanor had learned long ago that sometimes you had to act as if you belonged until you actually did. I may know nothing about cattle, but I can learn. And I do know numbers. The judge mentioned you could use help with the books. Thaddeus ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it standing in disarray. Books are a mess. Haven't kept proper records in a while. Then that's where I'll start, Eleanor decided. But first, let's see about supper. While Thaddeus brought up water for her to wash, Eleanor unpacked her few possessions. Her clothing, serviceable dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a shawl for cooler evenings, filled only half the dresser drawers. Her books took up more space, and she arranged them carefully on the empty shelf near the window. Shakespeare's collected works, Austen Dickens, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, several texts on mathematics and natural science that she used for teaching. She changed from her wedding dress into a simpler blue cotton one, washed her face and hands, and pinned her hair back up in its usual style. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she wondered what Thaddeus saw when he looked at her. A plain spinster schoolteacher? A business partner? Or perhaps simply a stranger who had invaded his solitary existence? Downstairs, she found the kitchen at the back of the house. It was larger than she'd expected, with a cast-iron stove, a work table, and cabinets that seemed reasonably well stocked with basic staples. A door led to a small vegetable garden, now mostly dried and withered from neglect, though a few hardy herbs still grew along the fence. Rosemary, she murmured, rubbing a sprig between her fingers and inhaling its sharp, piney scent. Thyme. Good. She gathered some of each, then returned to the kitchen to assess what she had to work with. Thaddeus appeared in the doorway as she was examining the contents of a flour bin. Found something to cook? He asked. I believe so. There's salt pork in the cold box, and these potatoes are still good. With a bit of onion and the herbs from outside, I can make a decent stew. He nodded and turned to leave. Thaddeus, she called after him. Where do you keep your count books? He paused. Desk in the study, off the parlor. Haven't touched them in months. Would you mind if I looked them over after supper? They're your books now too, he said, echoing her earlier words about the ranch. Then he was gone, his boots echoing across the wooden floor. Eleanor set to work, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of cooking. As she chopped and stirred, she tried to imagine what her life would be like here. The silence was profound after the constant bustle of town. No children's voices calling to her as she walked down the street. No neighbors dropping by for tea and gossip. No school bell marking the hours of her day. Just vast open space, the occasional lowing of cattle, and a taciturn husband who looked at her with eyes haunted by ghosts she couldn't see. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she jumped when Thaddeus reappeared. Cleaner now, his hair damp from washing. Smells good, he offered, hanging back as if uncertain of his place in his own kitchen. It's nearly ready, she replied, recovering her composure. Would you like to eat here or in the dining room? Here's fine. Don't stand on ceremony. Eleanor nodded, serving the stew into 2 bowls. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the silence broken only by the clink of spoons against crockery. This is good, Thaddeus said after several bites, sounding faintly surprised. Thank you. I'm not an exceptional cook, but I manage well enough with simple dishes. He nodded, continuing to eat with the focused efficiency of a man who viewed food as fuel, nothing more. Eleanor tried not to stare, but she found herself studying him when his attention was on his bowl. His features were strong, a straight nose, firm jaw darkened with stubble, thick brows that shadowed his eyes. Lines etched the corners of his mouth and eyes, evidence of hard years and harder grief. Yet there was a compelling quality to his face, a raw honesty that drew her gaze. I thought I'd start cleaning tomorrow, she said, breaking the silence. The bedroom first, then perhaps work my way through the house. Do what you want, he replied, then seemed to hear how dismissive that sounded. I mean, it's your house now. Change what needs changing. I don't intend to erase the past, Thaddeus. She chose her words carefully, just to make the place livable again. His eyes flickered up to meet hers, and something passed between them, not understanding exactly, but perhaps the beginning of it. You'll need help with the heavy work, he said, moving furniture and such. Just tell me what you need done. Thank you. I will. After supper, Eleanor insisted on washing the dishes herself, and Thaddeus retreated to the porch with his pipe. By the time she finished, dusk had settled over the ranch, the sky turning a deep, velvety blue. She found him sitting in a rocking chair, staring out at the darkening land. May I join you? She asked. He gestured to the empty chair beside his, and she sat, smoothing her skirts beneath her. It's peaceful here, she observed, listening to the chorus of night insects and the distant call of a coyote. That's one word for it, he replied, but there was no bitterness in his tone. They sat in silence as the first stars appeared, bright pinpricks against the vastness of the sky. Eleanor had expected the day to be more difficult, had braced herself for awkwardness or even hostility. Instead, she found herself relaxing for the first time since the judge had summoned her to propose this arrangement. I looked at the account books. Thaddeus said suddenly. They're in worse shape than I remembered. I'll sort them out, Eleanor assured him. It may take time, but I'm good with figures. Judge Wilson said you had schooling back east. Yes, at a women's seminary in Massachusetts. My father believed in education for both his sons and daughters. She smiled faintly at the memory. He was considered quite radical in his views. He sounds like a wise man. He was. Eleanor glanced at Thaddeus, surprised by his comment. What about your father? Practical, hard-working. Expected the same from me. He tapped his pipe against the porch rail, emptying it of ash. We didn't always see eye to eye, but I respected him. It was the most personal information he had volunteered all day, and Eleanor sensed he didn't often speak of his family. She decided not to press further tonight. I should retire, she said instead, rising from her chair. It's been a long day. Thaddeus stood as well, the ingrained courtesy at odds with his rough exterior. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Thaddeus. She made her way upstairs, aware of his eyes following her until she disappeared from view. In the bedroom, she changed into her nightgown and brushed her hair, the simple routine grounding her in the strangeness of this new place. The bed, freshly made with linens she had found in the closet, looked too large for one person. Eleanor lay down, pulling the quilt up to her chin despite the warmth of the night. The house creaked and settled around her, unfamiliar sounds that would take time to get used to. Mrs. Morgan, she whispered to the darkness, testing the name, trying to make it feel like hers. It didn't, not yet. Perhaps it never would, but as sleep claimed her, Eleanor found herself thinking not of what she had left behind, but of what might lie ahead in this new life she had chosen. Eleanor woke to unfamiliar birdsong and sunlight streaming through uncurtained windows. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality settled over her like a weight. The ranch, her marriage, her new life. She dressed quickly in a practical brown skirt and white shirtwaist, pinned her hair in its usual neat bun, and made her way downstairs. The house was silent. In the kitchen, she found a pot of coffee still warm on the stove, and a note scrawled in a rough hand, "Gone to check the north pasture. Back by noon." Eleanor poured herself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the back porch. The morning was already warm, the sky a vast, unbroken blue. She could see Thaddeus in the distance, a solitary figure on horseback, moving along the fence line. Even from here, she could tell he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. After breakfast, Eleanor set to work. She tied an apron around her waist, pulled back her sleeves, and began a thorough cleaning of the kitchen. Years of bachelor living had left a layer of grime that required determined scrubbing. By mid-morning, sweat dampened her collar, but the cast-iron stove gleamed. The work table had been scrubbed white and the floor swept and mopped. She was clearing cobwebs from the kitchen window when she heard the creak of the back door. "Making progress, I see," Thaddeus said, removing his hat as he entered. Eleanor turned, wiping a strand of hair from her forehead. "I thought you wouldn't be back until noon." Fence repair was simpler than expected. His eyes scanned the kitchen. "Place hasn't looked this clean in years." "It's a start," Eleanor replied, pleased, despite herself, at his approval. "There's fresh coffee if you'd like some." He nodded, pouring himself a cup. "Found something in town you might want," he said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and set it on the table. "Judge Wilson gave it to me yesterday before the wedding. Forgot about it until this morning." Eleanor untied the string and opened the package. Inside was a ledger book, its leather cover embossed with the word accounts in gold lettering, and a brass letter opener shaped like a feather. "He thought you might need these," Thaddeus explained, watching her face, "for the bookkeeping." "How thoughtful," Eleanor murmured, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "I must remember to thank him." "You can use the desk in the study," Thaddeus offered. "It was my father's, but it's gathering dust now." Eleanor looked up, touched by the gesture. "Are you certain? I wouldn't want to intrude on your private space." "Nothing private about it. Haven't used it in years." He took a sip of coffee. "Besides, you'll need somewhere proper to work if you're going to sort out this mess I've made." Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile she had given him. "Thank you, Thaddeus." He looked away, as if uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Thought I'd show you around the ranch this afternoon if you're interested. Need to know what you're getting into. I'd like that very much." After a simple lunch of bread and cheese, Thaddeus led Eleanor to the barn, where he saddled a gentle mare for her. "You ride?" he asked, adjusting the stirrups to her height. "Not since I was a girl," she admitted, "and never very well. Daisy here is steady as they come. She'll take care of you." He helped her mount, his hands firm at her waist, then swung easily onto his own horse. "We'll take it slow." They rode out from the ranch yard, Eleanor gripping the saddle horn tightly at first, then gradually relaxing as she found her seat. Thaddeus kept the pace easy, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was managing. "The ranch covers about 1,000 acres, he explained as they crested a small rise. "Runs from that ridge in the east to the creek in the west. North boundary is marked by the stand of cottonwoods you can just make out there." Eleanor squinted against the sunlight. "It's beautiful country." "It is when it rains. Drought's been hard these last 2 years." He gestured to their right, where cattle grazed on sparse vegetation. "Herds down to about 200 head. Used to be twice that." "But the core breeding stock is still healthy?" He looked at her with surprise. "Yes. How did you know to ask that?" "I read," she replied simply. "The school library has several books on animal husbandry and ranch management. I thought they might be useful." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You prepared for this marriage more thoroughly than I did." "I prepare for everything, Mr. Morgan. It's both my greatest strength and my most tiresome quality, or so I've been told." "Don't see how being prepared could be tiresome." He guided his horse down the slope toward a small stream. "This is one of the springs I mentioned. Hasn't dried up yet, thank God. Provides water for the south pasture." They continued their tour, Thaddeus pointing out the boundaries, the problem areas, the places where the land still yielded despite the drought. Eleanor listened attentively, asking questions that gradually became more informed, storing away information for future reference. As they circled back toward the ranch house, the sun hung lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Eleanor's muscles ached from the unaccustomed riding, but she felt a satisfaction she hadn't expected. This vast, challenging place would be her home now. The struggle to save it would give purpose to her days. "What do you think?" Thaddeus asked as they dismounted by the barn. "Still willing to take on this wreck of a ranch?" "It's not a wreck," Eleanor replied firmly. "It's wounded, perhaps. Neglected, certainly, but not beyond saving." He studied her face as if searching for something. "You really believe that?" "I do, and so should you." That evening after supper, Eleanor sat at the desk in the study, surrounded by ledgers and loose papers. The lamp burned low as she meticulously sorted through years of haphazard record-keeping, creating orderly columns of figures. The situation was worse than she had feared. The drought had devastated the herd, reducing their value by nearly half. The mortgage payments were 3 months overdue. Equipment repairs had been neglected, forcing Thaddeus to pay premium prices for emergency fixes when things broke down completely. Yet there were assets too. The land itself remained valuable. The water rights were secure, and despite everything, the Morgan name still carried weight with the cattle buyers in the region. Eleanor was so absorbed in her calculations that she didn't hear Thaddeus approach until his shadow fell across the desk. "How bad is it?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, pushing her spectacles higher on her nose. "Bad," she admitted, "but not insurmountable. Judge Wilson said your inheritance would clear the debts. It will, and leave enough to make some essential improvements." She tapped her pencil against the ledge. "But we'll need to be strategic about how we allocate the funds." Thaddeus entered the study fully now, settling into the worn leather chair across from the desk. "What do you recommend?" Eleanor laid out her preliminary plan. "Clear the mortgage arrears immediately. Repair the critical infrastructure. Purchase enough feed to see the cattle through until the rains came. Set aside a reserve for emergencies. No luxuries," she concluded. "No new furniture or paint for the house, not yet. Every penny must go toward making the ranch productive again." Thaddeus nodded slowly. "Thought this through." "It's what I do," she said with a small shrug. "I can have the bank transfer the funds tomorrow if you agree." "It's your money, Eleanor. You don't need my permission. It's our ranch," she corrected gently. "And while this may be a marriage of convenience, I believe we should make decisions together." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. "I agree with your plan," he said finally, "and I'm grateful." "Don't be grateful yet," she replied with unexpected lightness. "Wait until we've turned a profit." A chuckle escaped him, rusty from disuse but genuine. "You sound like my father. He always said gratitude was for Sundays and success was for every other day of the week. He sounds like a sensible man." He was. Thaddeus's expression softened with memory. "He would have liked him, and he would have approved of you." The compliment warmed Eleanor more than it should have. She busied herself organizing the papers to hide her pleased flush. "I'll ride into town tomorrow to speak with the bank. Is there anything else we need while I'm there?" "Seeds, maybe, for the kitchen garden, if you're interested in reviving it." "I am," she said, surprised he had noticed her examining the withered plots. "And perhaps some material for curtains." He gestured to the bare windows. "The house gets fierce hot in summer without them." Eleanor nodded, touched by his consideration. "I'll find something suitable." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional creak of the house settling. It wasn't the easy intimacy of long-married couples, but neither was it the strained politeness of their first day together. It was something in between, a cautious truce, perhaps, or the beginning of a partnership that might someday grow into something more. "I should turn in," Thaddeus said eventually, rising from the chair. "Dawn comes early." "I'll be up shortly," Eleanor replied. "I just want to finish these calculations." He paused at the doorway. "Don't work too late. Ranch will still be here tomorrow." After he left, Eleanor sat in the quiet study, listening to his footsteps ascend the stairs, followed by the soft close of his bedroom door. She felt an unexpected contentment, a sense of rightness that she hadn't anticipated when she agreed to this arrangement. Eleanor had never expected love in her life. She had made peace with that long ago when the young men of her acquaintance had pursued prettier, more vivacious girls, leaving her to her books and her teaching. She had built a life around other satisfactions, the achievement of knowledge, the respect of her students, the independence of her own earnings. Now at 32, she had become a wife after all, though in name only. Yet there was dignity in this union, a purpose that transcended romance. They were two solitary people joining forces against a world that had not been kind to either of them. Perhaps that was enough. She closed the ledger, extinguished the lamp, and made her way upstairs in the darkness. As she passed Thaddeus's door, she paused, listening to the deep, even breathing of a man already asleep. Then she continued to her own room, where she prepared for bed with her usual efficiency. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight she was content with the knowledge that she was no longer facing life alone. Eleanor's return to Redemption Creek a week after her wedding caused quite a stir. She drove the wagon herself, back straight, reins held competently in gloved hands. Her hair was arranged in its usual neat style, but she wore a new confidence like an invisible crown. "Miss Morgan," Mrs. Peterson called as Eleanor secured the wagon outside the general store. "How lovely to see you. How are you finding married life?" The question carried an undercurrent of curiosity that bordered on intrusive. Eleanor smiled pleasantly, refusing to satisfy the town gossips. "Quite well, thank you. The ranch keeps us both busy." Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly at the U.S., as if she doubted Eleanor had any real part in ranch operations. "Well, you must come to our sewing circle next Thursday. We'd love to hear all about it." "Perhaps," Eleanor replied noncommittally. She'd never been part of the sewing circle before her marriage, and she doubted their sudden interest stemmed from genuine friendship. Inside the store, Mr. Calloway greeted her with more warmth than she'd ever received as Miss Abernathy. "Mrs. Morgan, well, what can I help you with today?" Eleanor presented her list: seeds for the kitchen garden, material for curtains, flour, coffee, sugar, a few tools. As Miss Calloway gathered her items, the banker, Miss Mins, entered the store. His expression soured when he spotted Eleanor. "Mrs. Morgan," he said stiffly, clearly uncomfortable addressing her with her new title. "I received your letter regarding the mortgage payment." "Yes," Eleanor replied calmly. "I trust everything is in order?" "It is." He seemed reluctant to admit it. "I must say the payment was unexpected." "Not to me," Eleanor said. "The terms were quite clear in the mortgage document, which I've reviewed thoroughly." Mr. Simmons shifted uncomfortably. "Yes. Well, there's still the matter of the loan Morgan took out last spring for new breeding stock, which will be paid according to the schedule we've proposed," Eleanor said firmly. "As my letter indicated." The banker's mouth tightened. "That schedule is rather generous to yourselves." "It's practical," Eleanor corrected. "The bank will receive full payment with interest, but squeezing a ranch during drought serves neither the bank's interests nor ours." Mr. Simmons looked as if he wanted to argue further but thought better of it. "We'll accept your terms for now, but we'll be watching the situation closely." "As will we," Eleanor replied with a pleasant smile that didn't reach her eyes. After the banker left, Mr. Calloway chuckled. Never seen old Simmons back down like that. He's foreclosed on 3 farms this year alone. The bank has its interests." "As do we," Eleanor said, paying for her purchase. "I merely pointed out where those interests align." "Morgan made a smart match," Mr. Calloway remarked, helping load her items into the wagon. "Ranch was sliding downhill fast before you came along." "We're partners, Mr. Calloway," Eleanor said firmly. "We both bring value to the arrangement." On her way out of town, Eleanor stopped at the schoolhouse where her replacement, a fresh-faced girl of 20, was struggling to maintain order among the students. Eleanor watched through the window for a moment, remembering her own first days of teaching, the challenge of earning respect and attention from children more interested in spring sunshine than arithmetic. She had loved teaching, despite its frustrations. The moment when a child's face lit with understanding, the quiet satisfaction of guiding young minds toward knowledge, these had been the rewards that sustained her through years of spinsterhood and limited prospects. Yet as she turned back toward the wagon, Eleanor realized she didn't miss it as much as she had expected. Her work at the ranch bringing order to chaos, solving problems, building something lasting provided a different but equally profound satisfaction. When she arrived home, she found Thaddeus in the barn repairing a broken harness with methodical patience. He looked up as she entered, his expression lightening slightly at the sight of her. "How was town?" he asked, setting aside his work. "Informative," she replied, removing her gloves. "The mortgage payment has been received, though Simmons was not entirely pleased with our proposed schedule for the breeding stock." "Simmons is never pleased unless he's foreclosing on someone," Thaddeus observed dryly. "So I gathered." She settled on a hay bale across from him. "I purchased everything on our list, plus something extra." From her pocket, she withdrew a small packet of coffee candy. "I thought you might enjoy these. I noticed you have quite a fondness for coffee." Thaddeus accepted the gift with evident surprise. "Haven't had these since I was a boy," he said, turning the packet in his hands. "My mother used to buy them as a special treat." "I'm glad they bring back a good memory," Eleanor said, pleased by his reaction. "Thank you," he said simply, tucking the candy into his shirt pocket. Then, as if embarrassed by the moment of sentiment, he changed the subject. "I checked the North Spring today. Water levels holding steady." "That's good news," Eleanor replied, accepting his shift to practical matters. "I was thinking we might plant some drought-resistant feed near it, make use of the natural irrigation." Thaddeus nodded. "Could work. I've been meaning to try that for—" He stopped, his expression darkening. "For some time," Eleanor supplied gently. "Since before Sarah died," he admitted, returning to his work on the harness, his movements suddenly more forceful. "Never got around to it." Eleanor recognized the pain that flashed across his face at the mention of his late wife's name. It was the first time he had spoken of her directly, and Eleanor sensed both the significance and the danger of the moment. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. "If you want to." Thaddeus's hands stilled on the leather. For a long moment, Eleanor thought he would refuse, retreat back into the fortress of silence he had built around his grief. But then he spoke, his voice low and rough. "She was sunshine," he said simply. "Everything good and warm, laughed easy, forgave quick, made this place feel like heaven even in the hardest times." Eleanor listened without interruption, her heart aching for his loss and for the love she heard in his voice. A love she had never experienced and perhaps never would. She gave me a son, he continued. Jacob. He had her eyes, her smile. Was just learning to ride when the fever took them both. His hands clenched on the harness. 3 days. That's all it took. 3 days to lose everything that mattered. I'm so sorry. Thaddeus, Eleanor said, knowing the words were inadequate but having nothing better to offer. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without looking up. After I couldn't... Nothing seemed worth the effort. Let everything go to hell because I couldn't see the point in fighting anymore. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Eleanor understood then the depth of his neglect of the ranch, not laziness or incompetence, but a profound grief that had robbed him of the will to continue. And now? She asked soft. Thaddeus finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. Now I've made a promise to you, to try. Can't guarantee success, but I'll do my part. That's all anyone can ask, Eleanor replied, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and hope. We'll face it together. Day by day. A week later, the first visible signs of change appeared at the Morgan Ranch. The kitchen garden had been cleared and replanted, neat rows of seedlings promising future harvests. Curtains hung in the downstairs windows, simple cotton in a soft blue that Eleanor had chosen for its practicality rather than decoration, though the effect was pleasing nonetheless. Thaddeus had repaired the broken porch step and replaced the missing shutter, while Eleanor had scrubbed and polished until the interior gleamed. The house began to feel like a home again, though Eleanor was careful to preserve what she could of its original character. Sarah's embroidered cushions remained on the parlor sofa. The family Bible still occupied its place of honor on the mantel. Jacob's wooden toy horse stood on a shelf in the study, a silent reminder of the child who had once played there. Eleanor had no wish to erase the family that had come before. She sought instead to honor their memory while building something new from the foundation they had laid. The true test of their partnership came 3 weeks into their marriage, when a sudden thunderstorm blew in from the west. Lightning struck a tree near the north pasture, igniting a fire that threatened to spread to the dry grass beyond. Eleanor was in the kitchen when she saw the smoke rising against the darkening sky. Without hesitation, she hitched the wagon, filled barrels with water, and drove toward the flame. She found Thaddeus already there, beating at the fire's edge with a wet blanket, his face streaked with soot. "Take the east side," he shouted when he saw her. "Keep it from reaching the grass." Eleanor worked alongside him, her skirts hitched up, sleeves rolled, sweat and rain mingling on her face as she fought the flames. They labored in tandem, communicating with gestures and brief words, united in purpose. When the rain finally intensified, dousing the last of the fire, they stood panting, exhausted but triumphant. Thaddeus looked at Eleanor, taking in her bedraggled appearance, hair escaping its pins, face smudged with ash, dress singed at the hem, and something shifted in his expression. "You're quite a woman, Eleanor Morgan," he said, his voice rough with smoke and something else she couldn't identify. "And you're quite a man, Thaddeus Morgan," she replied, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. He reached out hesitantly and brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek. The touch was brief, almost imperceptible, but Eleanor felt it like a brand against her skin. Then the moment passed and they turned to assess the damage, partners once more in the business of survival. That night, as she soaked in a tub of hot water, easing the ache in muscles unaccustomed to such labor, Eleanor reflected on the day's events. The emergency had revealed something she hadn't fully acknowledged. She cared about this place now. About the ranch, yes, but also about the man who had reluctantly opened his broken life to her. It wasn't love. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But it was something solid and real. A connection forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. For a marriage that had begun as a business arrangement, it seemed a remarkable development indeed. As summer deepened into August, life at the Morgan Ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor rose early each morning to prepare breakfast before Thaddeus headed out to work the land. She spent her days divided between household tasks and bookkeeping, occasionally riding out to bring him lunch or assist with lighter ranch work. Evenings found them on the porch, watching the sunset while discussing the day's events and plans for tomorrow. It was not the passionate marriage of romantic novels, but it was peaceful, purposeful, and increasingly satisfying to them both. The ranch was beginning to show signs of recovery. The newly planted fields near the North Spring were sprouting promising green shoots. The cattle were looking healthier, their ribs no longer so prominent beneath their hides. The house itself had transformed from a neglected shell into a welcoming home. "I received a letter from my cousin in Boston today," Eleanor mentioned one evening as they sat in the parlor. She with her mending, he with a newspaper that was 3 days old by the time it reached them. Thaddeus looked up. "Good news, I hope. She's invited me to visit at Christmas." Eleanor's needle paused in its steady rhythm. "It's been 5 years since I've seen her." "You should go," Thaddeus said without hesitation. "The ranch can spare you for a few weeks." Eleanor studied his face, searching for any sign that he might miss her presence. His expression remained neutral, though something flickered briefly in his eyes. "Would you manage all right?" she asked. "Without my cooking, at least." A small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "Survived on my own cooking for 3 years. Might not enjoy it, but I won't starve. I'll think about it," she replied, returning to her mending. The invitation had pleased her, yet the thought of leaving Thaddeus stirred an unexpected reluctance. The following Sunday, they attended church together for the first time since their wedding. Eleanor wore her best dress, a deep green wool that complemented her eyes, while Thaddeus had shaved carefully and donned a clean shirt and string tie. They made a handsome couple as they drove into town, though neither would have described themselves as such. The church fell momentarily silent when they entered, curious gazes following them to a pew near the middle. Then whispers erupted, quickly hushed as the pastor began the service. Eleanor kept her eyes forward, her back straight, though she was acutely aware of the speculation surrounding them. Looks good on him, marriage does. She's filled out some. Ranch living must agree with her. Bet they're hoping for a child soon. At her age. That last comment, barely audible from 2 rows behind, brought a flush to Eleanor's cheeks. The possibility of children had never been discussed between them, their marriage still existing in a state of careful propriety. She glanced at Thaddeus, wondering if he had heard, but his face revealed nothing, his attention seemingly fixed on the pastor's sermon. After the service, they were approached by Judge Wilson, his weathered face creasing into a smile of genuine pleasure. "The Morgans," he said warmly, clasping Thaddeus's hand and nodding respectfully to Eleanor. "You're a sight for sore eyes. How's the ranch coming along?" "Better," Thaddeus replied. "Eleanor's inheritance cleared the debts. New plantings are coming up strong, and the accounts are finally in order," Eleanor added. "Though I'm still discovering irregularities from the past few years." The judge chuckled. "I don't doubt it. Thaddeus here never could keep a ledger straight, even when his father was drilling him in it." "Some skills skip a generation," Thaddeus said dryly, "and some are acquired through marriage," the judge observed, his shrewd eyes moving between them. "You two seem well matched despite my heavy-handed matchmaking." Eleanor felt Thaddeus's hand come to rest lightly at the small of her back, a public acknowledgement of their connection that surprised and pleased her. "We manage," he said simply. But there was no resentment in his tone. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Peterson intercepted them, insistent that Eleanor join the next sewing circle meeting. "We're making quilts for the orphanage in Copper Ridge," she explained. "We could use your neat stitching." Miss Eleanor hesitated, torn between her instinctive wariness of the town gossips and a genuine desire to contribute to a worthy cause. "You should go," Thaddeus said quietly, "if you want to." She looked at him, grateful for his understanding. "Perhaps I will, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you for the invitation." On the drive home, Eleanor found herself more relaxed than she had expected to be after the scrutiny they had faced. "That wasn't as uncomfortable as I feared," she admitted. "People will always talk," Thaddeus replied with the philosophical attitude of someone who had been the subject of gossip for years. "Doesn't matter much what they say as long as we know the truth of things." "And what is the truth of things, Thaddeus?" Eleanor asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider its implications. He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally did, his voice was low but steady. "The truth is, I'm grateful you're here," he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Not just for the money or the help with the ranch, FOR, making the house feel like a home again." The simple admission warmed Eleanor more than any flowery declaration could have. "I'm grateful too," he replied softly, "for the purpose you've given me, the place to belong." They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, each absorbing what had been said and what remained unspoken between them. 2 days later, trouble arrived in the form of a telegram from the cattle buyer in Santa Fe. The price per head had dropped significantly due to an oversupply in the market. If they proceeded with their planned sale in September, they would barely break even after the cost of driving the herd to market. "We could wait," Eleanor suggested as they discussed the situation over supper. "Hold the cattle until winter when supply might be lower." Thaddeus shook his head. "Feed costs would eat any profit, and we need the money for the final mortgage payment in October." Eleanor frowned, mentally reviewing their finances. "We still have some of my inheritance set aside for emergencies. We could use that for the mortgage and wait for better prices." "No." Thaddeus's response was firm. "That money's our safety net. I won't risk it on market speculation." "Then what do you suggest?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep frustration from her voice. "I'll talk to Wilson about other buyers. Maybe the Army contract at Fort Branson is still open. Might get better prices there." "That's 3 days further by trail," Eleanor pointed out. "The men would need extra pay, and the cattle would lose condition on the longer drive." "I know that," Thaddeus snapped, then immediately looked contrite. "I'm sorry. I know you're trying to help. We're both trying to solve the same problem," Eleanor said evenly. "Perhaps we should sleep on it." "Fresh eyes in the morning," Thaddeus nodded, pushing away from the table. "I'll check on that lame mare before turning in." He grabbed his hat and strode out, leaving Eleanor to clear the dishes alone. She understood his frustration. They had worked so hard to rebuild, and now forces beyond their control threatened their progress. But his quick dismissal of her suggestions stung nonetheless. Later that night, Eleanor sat at the desk in the study, reviewing their options once more. The figures stubbornly refused to align in their favor. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Thaddeus enter until he placed a cup of tea beside her. "Peace offering," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised by both his presence and the gesture. "Thank you." He settled into the chair across from her, his own cup cradled in his hands. "You're right. We should consider all options. And you're right to be cautious about using our reserves," Eleanor acknowledged. "We need to find a middle path." Thaddeus leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "What if we split the herd? Sell half now at the lower price to make the mortgage payment. Hold the rest until winter, using the emergency fund to cover feed costs if necessary." Eleanor considered this, quickly calculating. It could work. We'd be taking a measured risk rather than gambling everything. "A compromise," he said with a small smile. "Like marriage itself, I suppose." The comparison caught her off guard. Yes, I suppose it is. They sat in silence for a moment. Sipping their tea, the earlier tension dissolved into something warmer. I've been thinking about what you said, Thaddeus ventured, about visiting your cousin at Christmas. Oh? Eleanor kept her tone neutral, though her interest quickened. I think you should go, but... He hesitated, then continued more firmly. I'd like you to come back to the ranch. To ... single quotes, he struggled for the right word. To us. The simple request carried more weight than its plain phrasing suggested. It was an acknowledgement that what existed between them had become something worth preserving, something more than a business arrangement. I would always come back, Thaddeus, Eleanor said quietly. This is my home now. He nodded, relief evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulder. Good, that's ... good. When he rose to leave, he paused beside her chair. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might touch her hair, her shoulder, perhaps even her cheek as he had after the fire. Instead, he simply looked down at her, his eyes conveying what he couldn't yet put into words. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Thaddeus. Long after he had gone upstairs, Eleanor remained at the desk, no longer seeing the columns of figures before her. Instead, she was thinking of the subtle shift that had occurred between them. Not passion, not even love in the conventional sense, but something equally precious. Trust, a foundation upon which something stronger might yet be built. September brought the first hints of autumn to Redemption Creek. Mornings dawned crisp and cool before yielding to warm afternoons. The land had begun to change, subtle shifts in color and texture that only those intimately connected to it would notice. Thaddeus pointed these changes out to Eleanor as they rode the boundaries together, her horsemanship improving daily under his patient guidance. See there, he said, gesturing to a stand of cottonwoods in the distance, leaves just starting to yellow at the edges. We'll have an early winter this year. Eleanor studied the trees, trusting his reading of the natural signs she was only beginning to understand. Should we adjust our plans? Buy more feed earlier than we'd thought? Might be wise, Thaddeus agreed, pleased by her practical response. I'll speak to Calloway next time I'm in town. Their decision to split the cattle sale had proven sound. The first half of the herd had fetched enough to make the mortgage payment with a small margin left over. The remaining cattle were gaining weight on the late summer grass, promising better prices when they went to market in November. As they turned back toward the ranch house, Eleanor noticed Thaddeus watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. What is it? She asked. Have I done something wrong? No, he said quickly. Just thinking that you sit a horse better than most men I know. For someone who couldn't ride 3 months ago. The compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. I have a good teacher. You're a quick study, he countered, then added more quietly. You'd have made a fine rancher's wife even without the inheritance. Eleanor looked at him sharply, surprised by the admission. Thank you. That means a great deal, coming from you. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in thought. Eleanor found herself increasingly aware of Thaddeus as a man. The breadth of his shoulder, the strength of his hands on the reins, the way the sun brought out copper highlights in his dark hair. These observations disturbed her, not because they were unwelcome, but because they awakened longings she had long ago decided to suppress. Their marriage was progressing well as a partnership. Did she dare hope for more? And if she did, would Thaddeus ever be ready to offer it? The ghost of Sarah still moved through the house, present in the objects Eleanor carefully preserved, and the moments when Thaddeus's eyes grew distant with memory. That evening, Eleanor attended her first meeting of the town's sewing circle, held at Mrs. Peterson's home. The initial awkwardness, the too bright smiles, the overly careful questions gradually gave way to genuine conversation as the women worked on their quilts for the orphanage. Your stitches are remarkably even, Mrs. Morgan, Mrs. Holloway observed, examining Eleanor's work. I've always envied your precision. Thank you, Eleanor replied, surprised by the sincerity in the older woman's voice. I find it relaxing, the rhythm of it. How are you finding ranch life? Mrs. Peterson asked, offering Eleanor a cup of tea. I imagine it's quite a change from teaching. It is, Eleanor agreed, but a welcome one. I enjoy the challenges. And how is Thaddeus? Mrs. Wilson, the judge's wife, asked gently. John the judge says he seems more himself these days. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. He's healing, I think. The ranch is coming back to life, and perhaps he is too. The women exchanged glances, and Eleanor sensed a shift in their attitude toward her, a new respect, perhaps even approval. It couldn't have been easy, Mrs. Wilson said quietly, stepping into another woman's home, especially one so beloved as Sarah. Sarah made that home what it was, Eleanor replied, her voice steady. I have no desire to replace her in Thaddeus's memory. I'm simply trying to help him build something new from what remains. Mrs. Wilson patted her hand. You're doing well, my dear. Better than any of us expected, if I'm being honest. Though a child would certainly cement things, Mrs. Peterson added with the tactlessness of the elderly. Have you and Thaddeus discussed family? Eleanor felt heat rise to her face. We're focused on saving the ranch at present, she said diplomatically. Well, don't wait too long, Mrs. Peterson advised, oblivious to Eleanor's discomfort. At your age, children don't come as easily. Mrs. Wilson shot her friend a quelling look. Eleanor and Thaddeus will make their own decisions in their own time. Martha. The conversation moved to other topics, but Eleanor's mind remained unsettled. Children. It was something she had longed for in her youth, a dream she had gradually relinquished as the years passed without a suitable match. Now, technically, she was in a position to become a mother, but in a marriage that existed largely on paper. On the drive home, she found herself wondering if Thaddeus ever thought of having more children, of giving Jacob the siblings he would never now grow up to know. The idea seemed both beautiful and painful, a possibility suspended in the fragile space between them. Eleanor was so absorbed in these thoughts that she didn't immediately notice the rider approaching from the east. It was only when the man called out that she pulled the wagon to a halt, suddenly alert to potential danger on the isolated road. "Mrs. Morgan?" The rider drew closer, and Eleanor recognized him as one of the hands from the neighboring Carson ranch. "Ma'am, Mr. Morgan sent me to find you. There's been an accident." Her heart lurched painfully. "Thaddeus? Is he hurt?" "Yes, ma'am." "Nothing fatal," the man added quickly, seeing her expression. "He took a bad fall while rounding up strays in the North Canyon. Doc Patterson's with him at your place now." Eleanor snapped the rein, urging the horses to a speed she would never normally attempt on the rutted road. The ranch hand kept pace beside her, offering reassurance that Thaddeus had been conscious and alert when he left. By the time they reached the ranch, twilight had descended, the house windows glowing with lamplight. Eleanor barely waited for the wagon to stop before jumping down, gathering her skirts as she rushed inside. She found Thaddeus in the parlor, stretched out on the sofa, his face gray with pain beneath his tan. Dr. Patterson stood nearby, packing instruments into his bag. "Eleanor," Thaddeus said, attempting to sit up and wincing at the movement. "Don't you dare move," she ordered, crossing to his side and kneeling beside the sofa. "Not going. How is he? Broken collarbone, 2 cracked ribs, and more bruises than I care to count, Doctor," Patterson replied. "He's lucky it wasn't worse. That canyon's claimed more than one cowboy over the years. Will he recover fully?" Eleanor asked, her eyes never leaving Thaddeus's face. "Proper rest and care, yes. But he'll need to keep that arm immobilized for at least 6 weeks. No riding, no roping, no heavy lifting of any kind." Thaddeus grimaced, more at the prescription than the pain. "Ranch won't run itself, Doc. The ranch will manage," Eleanor said firmly. "We have hands for the physical labor. You hired them specifically for the fall roundup, remember? They need direction," Thaddeus argued, "which you can provide from horseback in a few weeks if you follow orders now, Doctor," Patterson interrupted. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm leaving laudanum for the pain. 1 spoonful every 6 hours is needed, no more." "I understand," Eleanor said, taking the bottle. "Thank you for coming so quickly." After seeing the doctor out, Eleanor returned to find Thaddeus attempting once more to sit up. "Must you be so stubborn?" she scolded, hurrying to support him. "Comes with the name," he grunted, finally achieving an upright position. "Morgan men are born hard-headed. Ask anyone, I don't need to ask. I've had ample evidence these past months." Despite her stern tone, Eleanor's hands were gentle as she adjusted the sling supporting his injured arm. Thaddeus studied her face. "You were worried." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "Of course I was worried. When John Carson's man said you'd been hurt, ... single quote," she trailed off, unwilling to give voice to the fear that had seized her. "I'm sorry," Thaddeus said, surprising her. "Didn't mean to frighten you. You can make it up to me by following the doctor's orders," Eleanor replied, attempting to reclaim her composure. "Now you need to rest. You think you can make it upstairs, or shall I make up a bed down here?" "I can manage the stairs," Thaddeus insisted, though his pallor suggested otherwise. In the end, it took both Eleanor and the ranch hand who had fetched her to get Thaddeus up to his bedroom. By the time they settled him on his bed, sweat beaded his forehead, and his breathing was shallow with pain. "Take the laudanum," Eleanor urged, measuring out a dose. Thaddeus shook his head. "Clouds the mind. Need to stay sharp for tomorrow." "Tomorrow you will rest," Eleanor said firmly. "The day after as well. I'm perfectly capable of giving instructions to the hands." "You don't know the North Range well enough," he argued. "Then you'll explain it to me, and I'll relay your instructions." When he still looked unconvinced, she added softly, "Trust me, Thaddeus, as I've trusted you." Something in her voice reached him. He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded, accepting the medicine with a grimace at its bitter taste. Eleanor helped him remove his boots and settled more comfortably on the bed, mindful of his injury. It was the first time she had been in his bedroom, she realized, a space as austere as he was, with little decoration beyond a photograph of a woman and child on the bureau, which she carefully avoided looking at. "I'll bring up some broth later," she said, turning to leave. "Eleanor," Thaddeus called softly, stopping her at the door. "Thank you." She glanced back at him, struck by the vulnerability in his expression, a man unused to depending on others now forced to accept help. "You would do the same for me," she said simply, agreed, his voice already growing drowsy from the laudanum. "I would." That night, Eleanor slept little, rising frequently to check on Thaddeus. Each time she entered his room, she found him either sleeping fitfully or staring at the ceiling. Pain etched in the lines around his mouth, despite the medication. "Should be asleep," he murmured during her third visit. "So should you," she countered, adjusting his pillows and offering water. "Can't get comfortable." He shifted restlessly, then winced. Ribs burned like fire. Eleanor hesitated, then sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "My father had broken ribs once from a carriage accident. My mother used to sit with him through the night, talking to distract him from the pain." "What did she talk about?" Thaddeus asked, focusing on her voice. "Books she had read, plans for the garden, memories from their courtship." Eleanor smiled softly at the recollection. "She told me once that pain shared as pain have." "Wise woman," Thaddeus murmured. "Tell me about them, your parents." So Eleanor did, sharing stories of her childhood in Massachusetts, of her scholarly father and practical mother, of the home filled with books and ideas and love. She spoke until Thaddeus's eyes grew heavy and his breathing deepened into sleep, her voice a bridge carrying him away from pain into dreams. The weeks following Thaddeus's accident brought profound changes to the rhythm of life at the Morgan Ranch. Eleanor rose before dawn each day, reviewing the work that needed to be done before meeting with the hands to distribute assignments. She spent hours in the saddle, checking fences, monitoring the cattle, and ensuring water sources remained viable as the weather. Evenings found her poring over the ranch ledgers, planning for the November cattle sale with a meticulousness born of necessity. Through it all, Thaddeus watched her with growing admiration. From his enforced position of rest, first confined to bed, then gradually allowed to move about the house, he observed the transformation of the schoolteacher into a capable ranch manager who commanded respect from men twice her size and with 10 times her experience. Jackson says the south pastures nearly grazed out. Eleanor reported one evening settling into the chair beside Thaddeus's on the porch. He recommends moving the herd to the west section next week. Not yet, Thaddeus advised. West section's better saved for late October. Move them to the upper meadow instead. Eleanor made a note in the small book she now carried everywhere. I'll tell him tomorrow. Oh, and Simmons from the bank stopped by while you were napping. He wanted to discuss extending credit for winter feed. What did you tell him? Thaddeus asked, curious how she had handled the banker who had always treated her with thinly veiled condescension. A small smile played at the corners of Eleanor's mouth. I told him we would consider his offer, but that Carson's feed store in Copper Ridge has better terms. He became remarkably flexible after that. Thaddeus chuckled, then winced as the movement jostled his healing ribs. You're getting the hang of this. I had a good teacher, she replied, echoing his earlier compliment about her writing. Their eyes met in the fading light, a moment of understanding passing between them. They had come so far from the awkward strangers who had stood before Judge Wilson 3 months ago, entering into a contract more than a marriage. Now they were partners in the truest sense, each contributing their strengths, each supporting the other's weakness. I've been thinking, Thaddeus said, breaking the comfortable silence. About your visit to Boston. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised. What about it? You should still go. My injuries won't prevent it. She frowned slightly. I hadn't decided yet. And with your condition, I'll be well enough by Christmas, he insisted. Ribs are already healing. Doc says I'll be back to light work in another week or two. Even so, there's the cattle sale in November and winter preparations ... single quotes all manageable, Thaddeus said firmly. You've earned the break, Eleanor, and family is important. He paused, his expression soft. I know that better than most. Eleanor studied him, trying to understand the mixture of emotions behind his words. Was he encouraging her visit out of genuine concern for her happiness, or was this his way of creating distance, of reminding them both that their arrangement remained, at its core, a practical one? So I'll write to my cousin tomorrow, she finally agreed, but I won't stay long, just through New Year's. Thaddeus nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. Later that night, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she found herself troubled by their conversation. The thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Thaddeus, even temporarily, no longer held the appeal it might have a few months ago. Boston represented her past, a life lived in the narrow confines of spinsterhood and respectable poverty. The ranch, with all its challenges and uncertainties, had become her present and, she hoped, her future. And Thaddeus? What had he become to her? More than a business partner, certainly. A friend, yes. But also something else. Something that made her heart beat faster when he looked at her with approval. Something that caused her to linger in the doorway of his room each night, reluctant to say goodnight. A week later, the autumn roundup began in earnest. The remaining cattle needed to be gathered, counted, and prepared for the drive to market in November. Eleanor had been dreading this time, knowing it would stretch their resources thin just as Thaddeus was beginning to regain some mobility. I can ride, he insisted over breakfast, his frustration evident in the set of his jaw. Not roping, just directing. I'm going mad sitting in this house. Eleanor regarded him skeptically. Dr. Patterson said another 2 weeks before riding. Patterson's being cautious. Thaddeus pushed his plate away, his appetite diminished by inactivity. I know my own body, Eleanor. I'm healing well. She hesitated, torn between concern for his health and understanding of his need to reclaim his role on the ranch. 1 hour, she finally conceded. On the gentlest horse we have. Jackson rides with you the entire time. Thaddeus opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Agreed, he said instead. Thank you. That afternoon, Eleanor watched anxiously as Thaddeus mounted the old gelding they used for teaching children to ride. His face paled slightly with the effort, but he settled into the saddle with tea. Jackson, their most experienced hand, stayed close beside him as they rode toward the northern pasture where the roundup was underway. Eleanor forced herself to return to the house, knowing her presence would only make Thaddeus more self-conscious of his limitations. She busied herself with household tasks, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of work. Yet her mind remained with him, imagining him riding the boundaries of his land, offering guidance to the hands, reclaiming his identity as a rancher. When he returned, 2 hours later instead of the agreed-upon one, his color was high and his eyes bright with an energy she hadn't seen since before his accident. You disobeyed orders, she said, trying to sound stern as she helped him down from the saddle. Couldn't help it, he replied, not the least bit repentant. Feels good to be useful again. You've been useful, Eleanor protested. Your advice has been invaluable. Thaddeus shook his head. Talking isn't doing. A man needs to do. She understood then, more clearly than before, what the injury had cost him beyond physical pain. For Thaddeus Morgan, identity was inseparable from action. To be unable to work his land, care for his cattle, repair his fences, these limitations had wounded his spirit as surely as the fall had broken his bones. Well, "You've done enough for today," she said, softening her tone. "Come inside. I've made stew." That evening, as they sat before the fire, Eleanor noticed Thaddeus watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "What is it?" she asked, self-consciously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about why Judge Wilson chose you." The question caught her off guard. "For the marriage, you mean?" "Yes." Thaddeus leaned forward slightly, wincing only a little at the movement. He could have found another woman with money, probably someone younger, maybe even someone with ranching experience. Eleanor felt a flutter of uncertainty. "I've wondered that myself. I think I know the answer now." Thaddeus's voice was quiet but clear. He knew you had the strength for it. Not just the books and the housekeeping, but all of it. Running a ranch when needed, making hard decisions, standing your ground. The compliment warmed her more deeply than the fire. "I didn't know I had it in me," she admitted. "I was just a school teacher." "You're still a teacher," Thaddeus said. "You've taught me a few things these past months, such as that there's more than one kind of strength, that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting the past." He paused, his gaze holding hers. "That sometimes what looks like an ending can be a beginning instead." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Never had he spoken so openly with such evident feeling. "Thaddeus," a sudden commotion outside interrupted them, voices calling, hoofbeats approaching at speed. Thaddeus was on his feet instantly, Eleanor just behind him as they moved to the door. Jackson dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, his face grave in the lamplight. "Fire, boss. Lightning strike up in the North Ridge. It's moving fast toward the dry creek bed." Thaddeus nodded, already reaching for his coat. "Gather the men. Wet blankets, shovels. We'll need to cut a fire break." "You can't go," Eleanor protested, gripping his arm. "Your injuries, I have to," Thaddeus said simply. "It's my land." Eleanor recognized the futility of argument. "Then I'm coming too." "No." His voice was firm. "I need you here. If the wind shifts, the fire could reach the house. Get valuables ready to evacuate if necessary." She wanted to protest further, but practicality won out. "Be careful," she said instead, her hand still on his arm. "Don't be a hero." Something flickered in his eyes, regret, resolve, perhaps something more. Then, with a suddenness that took her breath away, he leaned down and kissed her. Not the chaste peck of their wedding ceremony, but a real kiss. Brief but thorough, filled with everything they hadn't yet said to each other. "I'll come back," he promised when they parted, his voice rough with emotion. Then he was gone, striding toward the barn with only the slightest hitch in his step to betray his healing injuries. Eleanor stood in the doorway, fingers pressed to lips that still tingled from his kiss, watching until the darkness swallowed him. Then she turned back to the house, forcing her mind to focus on practical matters rather than the sudden, dizzying shift in their relationship. She gathered important documents, the deed to the land, bank records, the family Bible, and packed them carefully in a trunk. She filled every available container with water, prepared bandages in case of burns, and set out food for the men when they returned. All the while, she watched the northern horizon, where an ominous orange glow had begun to stain the night sky. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Occasionally, she could hear distant shouts carried on the wind, but no news came. Twice she saddled a horse, determined to ride out and find them, only to remind herself that she had promised to protect the homestead. It was nearly dawn when they returned, men and horses alike exhausted, clothes smoke-stained and faces blackened with soot. Thaddeus was among the last, riding slowly, his posture betraying his fatigue and pain. "It's contained," he reported as Eleanor helped him down. "Lost some grazing land, but the herd is safe." "And you?" she asked, studying his face for signs of injury beyond exhaustion. "Sore," he admitted, "but whole." The men accepted coffee and food with weary gratitude before dispersing to their bunks in the bunkhouse. Soon only Eleanor and Thaddeus remained in the kitchen, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. "About earlier," he began awkwardly. You don't need to explain," Eleanor interrupted, suddenly afraid of what he might say, that it had been impulse, adrenaline, a moment of weakness he now regretted. "I think I do." Thaddeus reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I'm not good with words, Eleanor. Never have been. But when I thought I might not come back, ... single quotes, he trailed off, then tried again. "What I'm trying to say is this isn't just an arrangement anymore. Not for me." Eleanor's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "For me either," she whispered. Their eyes met across the table, exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the wonder of this new understanding. Their marriage, begun as a business contract in a church full of skeptical witnesses, had transformed into something neither had dared to hope for, a true union of hearts. The days following their confession brought a delicate shift in the atmosphere of the Morgan household. Small gestures that would have seemed unremarkable in most marriages now carried profound significance. Thaddeus's hand lingering on Eleanor's when she passed him coffee at breakfast, Eleanor absently brushing a lock of hair from his forehead while checking the healing cut above his eye. The way they now sat closer together on the porch in the evening, shoulders touching as they watched the sun disappear behind the hills. They were like cautious dancers learning new steps, testing boundaries, discovering the rhythm of this transformed relation. Neither rushed to define what they had become to each other. content for now in the simple acknowledgement that something precious was growing between them. The November cattle sale approached, bringing with it a flurry of activity that left little time for reflection. Thaddeus, though still not fully healed, insisted on accompanying the herd to market. Eleanor argued against it, pointing out that the trail boss they'd hired was more than capable of overseeing the sale. "It's not about capability," Thaddeus explained as they discussed the matter over supper. "It's about presence. Buyers respect the Morgan name, but they need to see me there doing business as usual. Your health is more important than appearances," Eleanor countered, concern evident in her voice. "I'll be careful," he promised. "No riding with the herd. I'll take the wagon to Santa Fe, meet them there for the sale, then return." Eleanor sighed, recognizing the determination in his expression. "At least take Jackson with you, and if the pain worsens, I'll rest," Thaddeus finished for her, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I'm not as reckless as I used to be, Eleanor. I have reasons to take care now." The simple statement, delivered with quiet sincerity, silenced her protests more effectively than any argument could have. She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. 3 days, she said firmly. "Any longer and I'll come looking for you." He smiled, the expression transforming his features in a way that still caught her by surprise. "I believe you would." The morning of his departure dawned clear and cold, the first real frost of the season silvering the grass and rooftops. Eleanor rose early to prepare a hearty breakfast and pack provisions for his journey. They worked together in comfortable silence, moving around the kitchen with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity. When the time came for him to leave, they stood together on the porch, reluctant to part despite the practical necessity of the trip. "The house will seem empty without you," Eleanor admitted, adjusting the collar of his coat against the morning chill. 3 days, he reminded her, echoing her earlier words. "Hardly enough time for you to notice I'm gone." "I'll notice," she said softly. Thaddeus studied her face as if committing it to memory. Then he leaned down and kissed her, gently at first, then with a growing urgency that left them both breathless when they finally parted. "Something to remember me by," he murmured against her cheek. "As if I could forget," she replied, her usual composure momentarily abandoned. She watched him drive away, the wagon growing smaller against the vast landscape until it disappeared from view. Only then did she return to the house, already feeling the absence of his presence in the rooms they had come to share. The 3 days of Thaddeus's absence stretched interminably. Eleanor filled them with work, cleaning, mending, reviewing the books in preparation for winter expenses. In the evenings, she found herself reading aloud from her favorite novel. The sound of her own voice, a poor substitute for conversation, but better than the pressing silence. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, she was in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's herbs before the coming frost could claim them, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up, hope quickening her pulse. But it was not Thaddeus who rode into the yard, but a messenger from town, a young boy who worked at the telegraph office. "Mrs. Morgan," he called, dismounting with youthful agility. "Got a wire for you from Santa Fe." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron, trying to quell the sudden apprehension that seized her. "Thank you, Billy," she said, taking the folded paper from him. "Would you like some cider before you head back?" "No, ma'am, thank you." Pa's expecting me to help with the afternoon deliveries. With a quick tip of his cap, the boy remounted and rode away, leaving Eleanor alone with the telegram. She stood motionless for a moment, staring at the folded paper in her hand, afraid of what it might contain. Finally, gathering her courage, she opened it and read the brief message. "Sales successful. Stop returning tomorrow with good news." Stop, all well, stop. Thaddeus' relief washed over her, followed by a surge of anticipation. Good news beyond a successful sale? What could it be? And why the delay in his return? The questions occupied her thoughts through the evening and into the restless night. She woke early the next morning, too anxious to sleep, and set about making the house ready for his return. Fresh bread baked, his favorite stew simmering on the stove, the parlor dusted, and a cheerful fire laid ready to be lit against the autumn chill. It was mid-afternoon when she finally heard the wagon approaching. Eleanor checked her appearance in the hall mirror, a habit she had never indulged in before their relationship had changed, smoothing her hair and pinching color into her cheeks before stepping onto the porch to greet him. Thaddeus looked weary but triumphant as he drew the wagon to a halt. "Missed me?" he called, a teasing light in his eyes. "Hardly noticed you were gone," she replied with mock indifference, though the smile she couldn't suppress betrayed her. He climbed down carefully, his movements still hampered by his healing injuries but more fluid than before his departure. When he reached her, he pulled her into an embrace that lifted her briefly off her feet, heedless of who might see. "The sale?" she asked when he set her down, flustered but pleased by the uncharacteristic display of affection. "Better than we hoped," he reported, his arms still around her waist as they moved toward the house. "Got top dollar for every head. But that's not the best news." "Oh, okay." Eleanor glanced up at him, intrigued by the suppressed excitement in his voice. "The army was there, looking for breeding stock for the new fort up north. Their expanding operations need a reliable supplier of beef." Thaddeus paused on the porch, turning to face her fully. "They offered us a contract, Eleanor. 2 years, guaranteed prices well above market. It would mean security, a chance to build up the herd properly without worrying about short-term market fluctuation. Thaddeus, that's wonderful, Eleanor exclaimed, understanding immediately the implications for their future. Did you accept? Told them I needed to consult with my partner first, he said, the pride in his voice unmistakable. It's our decision, not just mine. The significance of his words was not lost on her. This was no mere courtesy. It was a profound shift in how he viewed their relationship, their partnership, their marriage. I think, she said carefully, that we would be foolish to refuse such an opportunity. My thoughts exactly. His smile widened, relief and satisfaction evident in his expression. I've invited the quartermaster to visit the ranch next week to finalize the details. Wanted him to meet the woman who's kept this place afloat through the worst drought in 20 years. Eleanor felt a flush of pleasure at his praise. I'll make sure we present the best possible impression. Inside, over the stew she had prepared, Thaddeus shared more details of his trip, the prices they had received, the connections he had renewed, the respect with which the Morgan name was still regarded in cattle circles. Eleanor listened attentively, asking pertinent questions that revealed her growing understanding of the business. You know, Thaddeus said as they lingered over coffee, with this contract we could afford those improvements to the house you've been wanting. New curtains, proper rugs, maybe even that fancy cooking stove you saw in the catalog. Eleanor smiled at his enthusiasm. Those things can wait. The money should go first to building up the herd, improving the water management system you've talked about. Thaddeus shook his head in mock despair. Most women would be demanding silk dresses and crystal vases, not discussing water management. I'm not most women, Eleanor replied with dignity. No, Thaddeus agreed, his expression softening. You're extraordinary, and I'm the luckiest man in the territory to have found you. The simple statement, delivered with such evident sincerity, brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. I believe, she said when she could trust her voice, that Judge Wilson found me for you. Then I owe him a debt I can never repay. Thaddeus rose from his chair and came around the table, holding out his hand to her. Come sit with me by the fire. I've missed our evenings together. In the parlor, the fire crackled warmly, casting a golden glow over the room that had once seemed so austere to Eleanor but now felt like the heart of her home. They sat close together on the sofa, her head resting against his shoulder, his arm around her in a protective embrace that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if they had always been meant to fit together this way. I've been thinking, Thaddeus said after a comfortable silence, about your trip to Boston. Eleanor tensed slightly. In the excitement of recent events, she had almost forgotten her planned visit. My cousin is expecting me, she said carefully. But if you need me here for the army contract, no, that's not it, Thaddeus interrupted gently. I was thinking that perhaps I might accompany you. Eleanor sat up, turning to face him with surprise. To Boston? But you've never expressed any interest in traveling east. I'm interested in being with my wife, Thaddeus said simply, and in meeting the family that helped make her the woman she is. The words my wife, spoken not as a legal definition but as a term of genuine attachment, sent a warm glow through Eleanor's chest. You would do that? Leave the ranch for weeks? Jackson can manage things here. With the cattle sold and winter setting in, it's as good a time as any. He reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering on her cheek. Besides, I think it's time the Morgans had a proper honeymoon, don't you? Eleanor laughed softly, joy bubbling up unexpectedly. What would the town gossips say if they could hear you now? They'd say that old Thaddeus Morgan finally came to his senses and realized what was right in front of him all along. His voice grew serious, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. A woman worth 10 of any man in this territory, with a mind sharper than a new-honed blade and a heart bigger than the Montana sky. Thaddeus, Eleanor whispered, overwhelmed by his word. He silenced her with a kiss that spoke more eloquently than any declaration, a promise and a pledge wrapped in tenderness and growing passion. When they finally parted, both were breathless, the boundaries of their relationship shifting once more toward a deeper intimacy. The Sunday before their departure for Boston, Eleanor and Thaddeus attended church together, just as they had done each week since their wedding. But where once they had walked side by side with careful space between them, now they moved as one, his hand at the small of her back, her steps matched to his longer stride. The change wasn't lost on the townspeople, whose curious glances had gradually shifted from skepticism to something approaching approval. The Morgans, Mrs. Peterson whispered to Mrs. Holloway as they passed. Who would have thought it would work out so well? Judge Wilson, Mrs. Holloway replied with a knowing smile. That man sees more than most give him credit for. After the service, they were approached by the judge himself, his weathered face creasing with genuine pleasure at the sight of them. You two are looking well, he observed. Ranch must be prospering. It is, Thaddeus confirmed, pride evident in his voice, thanks in large part to my wife's management. Eleanor felt a warm glow at the easy way he credited her, so different from the reluctant acknowledgement of their early days together. We've secured an army contract, she added. 2 years of guaranteed prices. That's excellent news, the judge said, clapping Thaddeus on the shoulder. Your father would be proud to see the Morgan Ranch thriving again. He would have approved of the woman who made it possible, Thaddeus replied, his hand finding Eleanor's and squeezing gently. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Patterson stopped them, his shrewd eyes assessing Thaddeus's movements. Those ribs healing properly, Morgan. No lingering pain? Good as new, Doc, Thaddeus assured him. Eleanor made sure I followed your instructions to the letter. I had to threaten to hide his boots more than once, Eleanor confided, earning a chuckle from the doctor. Smart woman, doctor. Patterson approved. Keep him in line. He lowered his voice slightly. Though, I must say, marriage seems to have done you both a world of good. There's color in your cheeks, Mrs. Morgan. That wasn't there when you were teaching. And you, Thaddeus, well, I haven't seen you stand this tall since before the tragedy. The reference to Sarah and Jacob might once have cast a shadow over Thaddeus, but now he nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Life has a way of surprising you, he said simply, sometimes with second chances you didn't know to ask. The Boston trip was postponed briefly while they finalized the Army contract, a delay that Eleanor secretly welcomed. Each day brought new discoveries in their evolving relationship, the comfort of waking up beside Thaddeus in what was now their shared bedroom, the quiet joy of working together toward common goals, the deepening trust that allowed them to speak honestly of hopes and fears long kept private. One evening in early December, as snow fell gently outside their window, Thaddeus broached a subject they had carefully avoided until now. "Eleanor," he began, his voice thoughtful in the darkness, "there's something we haven't discussed, something important." She turned toward him, barely able to make out his features in the dim light. "What is it?" "Children." The word hung between them, laden with possibility and uncertainty. "I know at our ages it's not guaranteed, but it's something we should talk about, if it's something you want." Eleanor felt her heart quicken. "Is it something you want, Thaddeus?" He was silent for a long moment, and she could sense him searching for the right words. "After Jacob died, I couldn't bear the thought of loving another child, of risking that kind of loss again." His voice grew hoarse with remembered pain. "But now, with you, I find myself wondering what our child might be like, if he'd have your eyes, your sharp mind, if she'd have your courage." Eleanor reached for his hand beneath the covers, holding it tightly. "I had given up the hope of children," she admitted. "It seemed one of the sacrifices required of a woman who remained unmarried past a certain age." "Yes, Thaddeus. I would very much like to have a family if we're so blessed." He gathered her close, his embrace communicating what words could not fully express: gratitude, hope, and a love that had grown steadily from the most unlikely beginning. They departed for Boston on a clear, cold day in mid-December, the ranch left in Jackson's capable hand. The journey east was Eleanor's first real adventure beyond the confines of Redemption Creek since her arrival years before, and she found herself viewing the changing landscape through new eyes. Not as an escape from spinsterhood, but as an exploration shared with the man who had become her true partner. Boston welcomed them with a light dusting of snow and the festive atmosphere of the Christmas season. Eleanor's cousin Amelia, a plump, cheerful widow with a fondness for bright colors, embraced them both with genuine warmth. "So this is the rancher who swept you off your feet," she exclaimed, studying Thaddeus with undisguised curiosity. "Your letters didn't do him justice, Eleanor." "My letters were perfectly accurate," Eleanor replied, cheeks pinking slightly at her cousin's frankness. "They were factual," Amelia corrected, linking arms with them both as she led them into her comfortable brownstone. "But they failed to capture the rather obvious affection between you two. And after hearing for years that you'd resigned yourself to the schoolroom, finding you married and positively glowing with happiness is a pleasant surprise indeed." The visit proved more enjoyable than either had anticipated. Thaddeus, initially uncomfortable with the city's confines and social expectations, found unexpected pleasure in experiencing Eleanor's childhood haunts through her eyes. The library where she had spent countless hours, the park where her father had taught her the constellations, the small bookshop where she had purchased her first Shakespeare volume with saved pocket money. For her part, Eleanor delighted in introducing Thaddeus to the few family members and friends who remained in Boston. She watched with pride as he charmed even her most critical aunt with his straightforward manner and evident devotion. "Wife, I admit I had my doubts when I received your letter about this hasty marriage," Aunt Harriet confided during a moment alone. "But seeing you together, well, my dear, it appears you've found that rare thing, a true companionship of equals. Your mother would have approved." The greatest gift came on Christmas morning when Thaddeus presented Eleanor with a small, carefully wrapped pack. Inside she found a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a book, which opened to reveal two tiny frames, one empty, the other containing a miniature photograph of Thaddeus. "For our future," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. "The empty frame is for whoever might join our family, whether by birth or by choice." Eleanor touched the pendant with trembling fingers, too moved for word. Instead, she handed him her gift, a pocket watch she had secretly purchased, its case engraved with their initials and the date of their wedding. "So you'll always find your way home," she said simply, "no matter where life takes us." They returned to Redemption Creek in early January, bringing with them books, small luxuries, and a renewed appreciation for the life they were building together. The ranch welcomed them with the peaceful stillness of winter, the land resting beneath a blanket of snow, gathering strength for spring's renewal. On their first evening home, after unpacking and sharing a simple meal, Thaddeus built a fire in the parlor while Eleanor arranged their new books on the shelves. The domestic scene was unmarked by ceremony, yet it held a significance that surpassed their formal wedding months before. "It feels good to be home," Thaddeus remarked, watching her move about the room with the easy familiarity of belonging. "It does," Eleanor agreed, settling beside him on the sofa. "Though I enjoyed Boston more than I expected to." "Because of the company?" he suggested with a smile. "Precisely." She leaned against him, comfortable in their closeness. "Though I must say, the Morgan Ranch has certain advantages over city living." "Such as?" "Privacy," she replied with unexpected boldness. meeting his gaze directly. No curious relatives watching our every interaction. No social calls interrupting our day. Thaddeus's smile deepened as he understood her meaning. Mrs. Morgan, are you suggesting we make use of this privacy? I believe I am, Mr. Morgan. Her voice held a mixture of certainty and shy invitation that he found irresistible. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. A business arrangement had transformed into a partnership into friendship, and friendship into a deep and abiding love that neither had dared hope for when they stood in the church those many months ago. What are you thinking? Thaddeus murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. That Judge Wilson is either very wise or very lucky, she replied, smiling against his chest. Both, I'd say. He pulled her closer. But not as lucky as I am. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. The Army contract ensured the ranch's prosperity, allowing for improvements long deferred. The house gradually transformed, not into a showplace of wealth, but into a true home that reflected both its history and its present occupants. And when, in late March, Eleanor shared the news she had suspected for weeks, that their family would indeed be expanding before the year's end, the joy that illuminated Thaddeus's face healed the last lingering wounds of his past grief, not erasing the memory of those he had lost, but making space alongside that memory for a future filled with hope. Do you ever regret it? He asked her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the land in shades of gold and purple. Marrying a stubborn rancher who barely knew how to smile when you met him. Eleanor considered the question, her hand resting lightly on the slight swell of her abdomen. Not for a moment, she answered truthfully. Though I wouldn't describe our beginning quite that way. How would you describe it? He asked, genuinely curious. She smiled, the expression transforming her face in a way that still caught his breath. I'd say it was the story of two lonely people who found, against all expectations, that what looked like an ending was actually the perfect beginning. Thaddeus nodded, understanding completely. I like your version better. It has the virtue of being true. Eleanor replied, leaning into his embrace as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And all the best stories I've found begin with truth.